Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to A Backwards Glance. I'm Sid Mickle, and it's time for a couple more stories from growing up here in Chambers County. And I'm happy to share these on this nice, pleasant September Monday. The subject matter today is a couple of events that happened with my cousin Bob. Now, we're not launching into the full-fledged series of stories that involve my cousin Bob and Uncle Larry because that'll be about 20 stories that are very, very focused. This is just a couple of things that happened during this particular timeline, and I want to share them with you today. When cousin Bob and I were young, we had a tendency to go down to the Avondale Mills Millpond. Well, we called it a mill pond because it was a pond owned by the mill. It seemed very appropriate. We would take a cane pole and line and a hook and put balls of bread on it, hang it over the fence, and try to snag a small brim or some fish from the pond. Just a mindless, fun, easy way to spend some time. And he and I always had a great time just visiting together and being together. Well, that day it had rained a little bit that morning, put us a little bit behind, but we made our way, took our bikes and rode down to the pond and began our fishing for the day. Wasn't long a kid came by on a bicycle, and we knew this kid. His name was Terry Whitmire, and Terry Whitmire was a really tough kid around town. At times, seemed like a real troubled young guy. I think he had come in with his mother and stepfather who was in business, I think maybe at the local Chevy dealership. But Terry came in and was known to be a really, really tough guy, and nobody messed with Whitmire. And we didn't call him Terry, we did call him Whitmire. So on this day, we're fishing and Whitmire stops, doesn't say a word. As I said, it had been raining. He picks up the back of his bike and he spins his tire as hard as he can and drops it in the mud and splashes mud and muddy water on Bob and I's back and our legs and pants. And he does it 3 or 4 times. And I'm looking back and Bob is saying to me, "Hey, just let it go. You don't want to mess with him." Well, that sounded like really good advice because I knew he was a tough guy. I played football with him. I watched him. He's 2 years older, and he was a really big-time, aggressive kid. But as is my way, I lost patience with trying to understand. And I turned to this guy and I said, "If you don't stop that, I'm going to whip your butt." Well, I could almost feel the shiver in my cousin Bob because I had that same shiver within me. I just couldn't take it anymore. I just didn't want to deal with it. And to his credit, Terry Whitmire said, "What did you say?" And I repeated myself with a lot of energy, I hope. And instead of coming over and destroying me, he just put his bike down and laughed and rode away. Well, after that little event, we were both like, boy, we dodged a bullet there. And Bob is just like, "Don't ever do that again. He will kill us both." So we were frightened, but we got through it. Later on, someone somehow got word of this little adventure to my older sister, Brenda. And she immediately found me, sought me out and said, "Do not ever do that again. Don't cross him. Don't mess with him. He's a really tough guy and he would snap you in half." And I knew that, but she just wanted to give me a good heads up. Well, you know what happened? A very strange thing happened. The next time I saw Whitmire, he was kidding with me. He stopped and told someone he was with the story and said, "You see that little boy right there? He told me he was going to whip my butt if I didn't stop messing with him," and started laughing. He and I established some sort of a decent relationship just through this one kind of scary time. And he and I dealt with each other just fine. We got along just great. We spoke to each other on a regular basis. I didn't hang out with him. He wasn't a part of my group. And I had a still very healthy fear of Terry Whitmire. I watched him one night in a junior high school game. I was in the 7th grade. He was in the 9th. He was tall, big, strong kid. On the last play of the game, he broke through the line, got in the secondary, and broke open, headed for a winning score. The horn sounded. Whitmire stopped. He thought the game was over. Didn't understand that after the play started, you could complete it. He stopped and was tackled. Well, of course, there was a huge outcry from the coaches and from players. It was a big deal. And I think it really upset him. I think it really, really bothered him that he didn't know that. Because to my recollection, he never came back after that. It was the last we saw of him on the football field. And I think it speaks to some of the troubling parts of his personality and some of the things maybe that weren't exactly in great balance within him. And unfortunately, Whitmire, his end came early in life in very unfortunate circumstances. And I hated that for him. I felt bad about it, but it wasn't really a surprise because he always had that edge to him. He always had that kind of strange vibe. And I hated it. I hated that that was the way life was for him. I got along with him after that day really well. So kind of a sad ending to that story. And the reason I tell this story is I think it's really important to remember you never know what's going on in people's minds. You never know what kind of struggles they are having within themselves. And I think it's always good advice. And I've been very lucky. I didn't learn this very young. I repeated that really dumb scenario much too often. But you never know. And it's always best to try to take a little bit of a higher road and avoid those kind of conflicts. Because sometimes people just aren't truly prepared to deal with things reasonably and logically. So now the next story I want to relay to you about my times with Cousin Bob. We're down at Camp Helen. Camp Helen was the vacation spot that Avondale Mills employees could use during the Mills shutdown, the vacation week. You could go to Camp Helen, I think it was maybe $50 a family. 3 incredibly delicious meals a day and snacks all day long in the dining hall. There was a beautiful long pier out into the ocean on the beautiful white sandy beaches between Panama City and Destin. That's where the camp was located, on Phillips Inlet. And along with that, there was a deep sea fishing yacht. You could go fish out near the oil rigs. There was a catfish boat that you could go fishing for catfish in the bay. Back at the camp, there were ski boats. There were sailboats, canoes. In the main area, there was volleyball. There was shuffleboard. There was almost any and every game, horseshoes, things of that nature, along with a dance hall and a jukebox, a piano, a laundry. It was just a self-contained place, and it was incredibly wonderful. I think back to it now about how lucky we were to go to that spot, that incredibly beautiful today and very pricey place today as kids every year for vacation. Well, this year we went down and as usual, Cousin Bob and I were there together. His grandparents, who he lived with, worked at the mill, as my parents did. We're there together. He's my best friend in the world, so we're running together the entire week. Well, a hurricane had come through and damaged the fishing pier out into the ocean. The thing was probably 100 yards long, maybe longer. A straight pier with a square on the end that people could go and stand around and fish out in the deeper water. Well, we talked my mother into letting me go to the ocean, to the beach alone without her. She had a terrible fear of water, and she made me promise not to get in the water, but we could go fish on the pier. Well, obviously they hadn't been out there. They didn't know the condition of the pier. We made our way up the ramp. We got on the flat level and we're walking along, and I realized just in front of us, the entire decking is gone. There's just the timbers that connect the main frame off the pylons. And I'm frozen. I'm like, no, I'm not going another step. I have a terrible fear of heights. And certainly I wasn't about to get out there in that situation with the waves crashing around a damaged pier. Well, you know what my cousin Bob did? He fishes where I am for a minute. He goes to that opening, hops up on the handrail, which is probably a 2x8 laid flat for people to put things and lean against, runs past the opening, hops back down on the deck and starts fishing there. And he's like, come on out here. And I'm like, no. I was absolutely shocked. I could not believe what I was watching. He had no fear of doing that. He had no fear of walking along an 8-inch rail 30 feet above these giant waves crashing in from the ocean amidst the wreckage of the pier. Nope, I'm going out to the end. He hopped down, he fished, he'd hopped over. He went to the end and fished. And I stood at the very far end, just barely in the water. That was the difference in the two of us and our personalities. My cousin Bob had no fear. He just did not see it. He did not allow it to enter into the decision making. And look, there are a few occasions where he probably today wishes he had understood a little bit better about fear. And I certainly knew that I wanted to know a few other things. But we had unbelievable times together. I'm going to relay a few stories to all of you about our days riding motorcycles right here in Chambers County. We could get a motorcycle license and we could drive a motorcycle on every road available. Dirt road, gravel road, paved road, state road, county road, interstate highway, anywhere at 14. Now, if my kids had come to me at 14 and said, I want you to buy me a motorcycle so I can ride on all these different places, I would have just laughed at them. I would have simply just laughed at them and walked away. My parents, somehow I talked them into giving me a motorcycle, probably because everyone else around, all my friends had motorcycles. And we made our way out and about in the world. And my cousin Bob was a little bit of a daredevil on a motorcycle. There was nothing he wouldn't try to do. And one of the things we did one day, we decided to ride from good old Lafayette on our motorcycles to Birmingham. Yeah, we struck out after school. We probably got started at 3:30. It gets dark around here about 4:30 in the winter. We probably had 50 cents between us. We get to Sylacauga and I am beginning to realize it's getting dark. We're going to get home in the dark if we turn around right now. And thank goodness, I see him pull over side of the road and I pull up beside him and he looks at me and he goes, I don't want to do this. I think we should just go home. I've never been happier to hear words like that from him in my life. Man, it was a long ride home, but I was so happy that we did not continue our path to the big city of Birmingham at 14 on our motorcycles. And no, we didn't tell any of our parents that story because that would have been the end of motorcycle riding for maybe ever, but certainly for a good long time. All right, so that's the setup for Cousin Bob's stories. And you throw in a dash of Uncle Larry and these things get real interesting. Because remember, he's about 6 years older and he's in charge when we're together. I hope these stories make a little bit of a dent in your day, add a little bit of seriousness and reflection, but also throw in a little bit of fun because that's what we dealt with around here. Some serious, but an awful lot of fun. So until we get back together sometime, maybe later this week or maybe early next week and have some more Southern flavored stories from Chambers County. Hope you guys have a great week. Take care of yourself and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.